Hey guys, so today we're going to be going over the first of our two lessons about the respiratory system. So for this lesson on the respiratory system, we're going to be going over some definitions, like different types of respiration. We're also going to be going over the structure of the respiratory system and the functions of those different structures. We're going to go over the process of external respiration, including how gases diffuse into and out of the alveoli, as well as how the muscles of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles help control breathing. And then in tomorrow's lesson, we're going to go over internal respiration. So respiration describes all of the processes that supply oxygen to the cells of your body, where that oxygen can then be used for cellular respiration. It's also how carbon dioxide is removed from the body, because carbon dioxide is a waste product produced during cellular respiration. External respiration occurs when oxygen and gas move between the air in the lungs and the blood in the capillaries of the lungs. And then internal respiration occurs when oxygen and carbon dioxide move between the blood and the tissues of the body. So it is a little bit confusing because external respiration also happens inside the body. People often think of external respiration as like breathing between the outside and into your lungs, but that's not external respiration. That's just breathing. External respiration happens in your lungs, between the air in your lungs and the capillaries that are wrapped around the outside of your lungs. And then the internal respiration happens deeper in your body at the level of your actual tissues. Cellular respiration, just as a little reminder, is the production of ATP that happens when we break down glucose molecules. It does require oxygen. If you remember, oxygen is the final electron acceptor at the end of the electron transport chain in cellular respiration. And then carbon dioxide is produced at multiple different stages. Breathing is the movement of air between the external environment and the body. So again, breathing is just getting the air into your lungs and then breathing it out of your lungs. And that is inhalation and exhalation. Okay, so let's go through these different structures that make up the respiratory system. We start with the nasal and oral cavity, where air is brought into the respiratory system anytime you inhale. Then you have the pharynx, which is the opening at the back of your oral cavity, where both the trachea and esophagus come down off of. Then you have the epiglottis, which is a little flap that closes over the opening of the trachea anytime food is being swallowed, so that the food doesn't go down the trachea, it will go down the esophagus instead. Then you have the larynx, which is also called the voice box. It contains two little thin sheets of elastic ligaments, which are the vocal cords, which vibrate at different tensions in order to produce different sounds as the air is forced past them. Then you have the trachea, aka the windpipe. That is the pathway that leads down towards your bronchi. The trachea is lined with mucus producing cells, as well as little cilia, which are little like finger-like projections, which trap debris and move it away from the lung. Then you have the bronchi, which is two tubes that branch off of the trachea, one towards each lung, and then bronchioles, which are further little branching airways that actually go into the lungs themselves. Those are surrounded by muscles, unlike the bronchi and the trachea, which is surrounded by cartilage. And then at the end of those bronchioles, we have alveoli, which are small air sacs that are filled with gas. So when you are inhaling, the oxygen from the air is going to go into those alveoli, and then the alveoli are surrounded by capillaries, and so the oxygen can diffuse from the alveoli into the capillaries. And then when you're getting ready to exhale, the carbon dioxide in the blood of the capillaries will diffuse into the alveoli, and then you can breathe that out. The lungs themselves are spongy organs that contain the bronchioles and the alveoli. The diaphragm is a muscle like here-ish that controls how you inhale and exhale. And then the pleural membrane is just a very thin membrane that surrounds the outside of the lung. So this is kind of what it looks like. Again, the nasal and oral cavity are just like your mouth and nose openings, essentially. And then at the back, where you have the nasal cavity, the oral cavity, and the trachea and esophagus all kind of coming together, you have the pharynx. This little flap here is the epiglottis. It would flap down to close over this opening right here in order to stop food from going down the trachea. Whoops, I clicked. And force the food to go down the esophagus instead, which is right here. Then you also have the larynx, which again is the voice box. And then we have the trachea, which is surrounded by cartilage. You can kind of see the little rings of cartilage here. Then that branches off into the two bronchi, which then further branch into the bronchioles. And then at the end of the bronchioles, if you kind of zoom in over here, this would be our bronchiole coming down. And at the end of the bronchioles, we have the alveoli, those air sacs. And this is what the inside of the air sacs would look like. So it has all of this little air pockets. And as you can see, wrapped around the outside of the alveoli is all of these capillaries. So oxygen, when you breathe in, would be inside these little gas pockets inside the alveoli, and the gas would diffuse from the alveoli into the blood of these capillaries wrapped around the outside, and then carbon dioxide in those capillaries would diffuse into these little air pockets to be breathed out. And then down underneath your lungs, you have the diaphragm, so that's that muscle right there. And then, of course, these little like bright pink things are the lungs themselves. So external respiration, again, is the movement of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the air in your lungs and the blood of those capillaries that are wrapped around your alveoli. The air is going to move into your lungs through the trachea, the bronchi, and then the bronchioles until it gets to the alveoli, which is kind of the end of that pathway. And then the oxygen can diffuse from the alveoli into the blood, and carbon dioxide can diffuse from the blood into the alveoli. Carbon dioxide and oxygen are always moving from high to low concentration. So this process of gas diffusion is always passive. It doesn't require any energy. And that's because your blood in the capillaries around the alveoli is always deoxygenated, meaning it doesn't have any oxygen in it. So obviously there's going to be more oxygen in your lungs when you've just breathed in than in your deoxygenated blood. So the oxygen will naturally diffuse from the higher concentrated area in your lungs to the lower concentrated area of the blood of your capillaries. And then the opposite is true for carbon dioxide. The blood in those capillaries around the alveoli has just come from the rest of your body. So any oxygen that had been in your blood had diffused out into your tissues. The carbon dioxide had diffused from your tissues into your blood and then got carried to your lungs. So there's lots of carbon dioxide in your blood. The amount of carbon dioxide in the air is much lower. So the carbon dioxide will just naturally diffuse from the blood of your capillaries into your lungs so you can breathe out. So yeah, again, this is just what it would look like. So this is the bronchiole, and then at the end you have the alveoli, which are these air sacs here, and wrapped around the outside, you can see the capillaries. And this is just showing you that the blood that is coming into this area, the blood that's coming into these capillaries, is from your veins. So it is going to be deoxygenated. It has just come up here from having traveled through all of the different veins of your body, got pumped from your heart to your lungs, and it's deoxygenated. So the blue is deoxygenated, and it has all the carbon dioxide from your tissues. That carbon dioxide will diffuse out into the alveoli to be breathed out, and then you'll breathe in, and that oxygen will diffuse from your alveoli into the capillary, making your blood oxygenated, where it can then go to your heart to be pumped back around to your body, to all of your tissues that need oxygen. So gases will also move from high to low pressure, not just high to low concentration. Atmospheric pressure stays relatively constant, but the air in your thoracic cavity, which is another name for your chest cavity, can be altered. And the diaphragm is one of the things that can alter that air pressure. So the diaphragm is a muscle at the bottom of your thoracic cavity. It actually separates your thoracic cavity, your chest cavity, from the abdominal cavity underneath it, where like your intestines are. And the diaphragm controls the air pressure of the thoracic cavity of your chest in order to pull air in or push air out. So this is the diaphragm here underneath the lungs. You can see it over here as well. It's just a very, very thin muscle. So during inhalation, your diaphragm contracts, which shortens your diaphragm and pulls it downwards, which increases the size of your thoracic cavity, thus decreasing the air pressure, because the air in there has more space now, so it's not putting as much pressure on your chest cavity. And so as your thoracic cavity's pressure decreases, it'll drop below the air pressure of the atmosphere surrounding you and pull air into your lungs. So it'll move from high pressure atmosphere to the lower pressure in your thoracic cavity. So what that would look like is your diaphragm is normally this like upside down U shape. And when it contracts, it kind of flattens out like this. And so it's going from having less space in your thoracic cavity to having more space open up in your thoracic cavity. And then during exhalation, when you need to exhale, the diaphragm will relax again. So it goes from this relatively flat, constricted position to relaxing and pushing back upwards. As the diaphragm pushes back upwards, as it relaxes, it actually pushes the air out of the lungs back out into the atmosphere, because it is going to decrease the amount of space in your thoracic cavity. That means it's increasing the pressure in there, and that increased pressure literally pushes the gases out of your lungs. So again, this is inhaling, the diaphragm is contracting and going downwards as it flattens out. And then when you are exhaling, that is because the diaphragm has relaxed and kind of formed that upside down U again and pushed all of the air out of your lungs as it does that. Intercostal muscles also help with the whole inhaling and exhaling process. Intercostal muscles are just the muscles in between your ribs that move your rib cage. So what's going to happen is a nerve stimulus will get sent to those intercostal muscles and cause them to contract. When your intercostal muscles contract, it pulls your ribs upwards and outwards. Like if you take a really deep breath, you can feel your ribs come up and out. That also increases the amount of space in your thoracic cavity, which allows for air to be pulled inwards. If your intercostal muscles are not stimulated, they will relax and lower your rib cage, which again helps to push air out of your lungs. So contracting your intercostal muscles pulls air in, relaxing them pushes the air back out again. A pneumothorax is when air builds up inside the thoracic cavity between the pleural membrane and the inner chest wall. So you have a buildup of air pressure outside of the lungs, but still inside of your thoracic cavity, which can end up causing your lungs to collapse because you can have more pressure in your thoracic cavity around your lungs than the air pressure inside of your lungs. And so that external air pressure collapses and squishes down your lungs. If you have a traumatic pneumothorax, that is when there is a deep puncture wound to the chest. And in that case, the air pressure in the chest cavity decreases, but the air flows into the chest through the wound instead of coming in through your lungs. So you actually like suck air in through the hole in your chest instead of like down through your trachea, which isn't good because then there's no way for it to get into your capillaries and be transported around your body. Okay, so that is it for today's lesson. Yeah, I think I'm just going to show you a diagram really quick and then we'll be finished. Okay, so here is a diagram of the respiratory system, and I apologize for how messy my writing is. But here we have the nasal cavity. Underneath where the mouth is, we have the oral cavity. And then kind of at the back where you would have the oral cavity coming together with the trachea, with the esophagus, would be back here as well. That is the pharynx. Underneath that, right here, we have the voice box, which is the larynx. And then this whole thing is all the trachea. And you can see that it has cartilage wrapped around it here. That trachea then branches off into the two bronchi, which is here and here, number 8 and 9. And then those branch off even more into the bronchioles, number 10. So all of this branching is these bronchioles. And then at the end of the bronchioles, we would have these air sacs where the gas exchange actually happens during external respiration. That is the alveoli, and they would be wrapped with the capillaries. And then at the very bottom here, this really thin muscle is the diaphragm, which again relaxes upwards during exhaling and flattens out as it constricts during inhaling. Okay, please let me know if you have any questions.